I'm Beatrice, and I thought I had built a life of unwavering trust with a man who cherished me above all else. For decades, Arthur had been my rock, my confidant, the steady hand guiding our shared journey. Our golden years were meant to be a serene culmination of a life well lived, filled with quiet comfort and the gentle rhythm of familiar routines. But then came the surgery, a necessary procedure that left me temporarily vulnerable, reliant on him in ways I hadn't been in years. As I lay recovering, drifting in and out of a haze of medication and discomfort, I heard him on the phone, his voice hushed, too careful. He spoke of restructuring, of necessary adjustments while I was out of commission. Thought I'd be powerless, confined to my bed, my mind dulled by painkillers, completely oblivious to his machinations. He believed he had the perfect window to execute his plan, to quietly empty our joint accounts, to dismantle our shared financial future, piece by piece. What he didn't know was that beneath the surface of my temporary weakness, a sharp, 60-plus-year-old mind was already stirring, a mind that had always valued independence, a mind that had quietly safeguarded a secret inheritance for decades. He had no idea that the moment he accessed those accounts, he was stepping into a trap of his own making, a financial labyrinth from which he would find no easy escape. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The surgery had been a success, the doctors assured me, but recovery was a slow, arduous climb. For the first few weeks, my world shrank too. The confines of our master bedroom, a sanctuary that now felt strangely confining. Arthur, ever the doting husband, hovered with a solicitousness that, in retrospect, bordered on excessive. He brought me meals, fluffed my pillows, and managed all household affairs with an efficiency that was both comforting and subtly unsettling. He'd sit by my bedside, reading aloud from my favorite novels, his voice a soothing balm, yet I'd catch him glancing at his phone, his brow furrowed in concentration before quickly tucking it away. He'd take calls in hushed tones from the hallway, always explaining them away as business matters or checking in with the office. I dismissed these fleeting moments of unease as the lingering effects of anesthesia, a mind still foggy from medication. After all, Arthur was Arthur, reliable, devoted, utterly predictable, or so I thought. One crisp Tuesday morning, about 3 weeks into my recovery, I felt strong enough to venture out of bed for a short while. Arthur had gone to the grocery store, leaving me with a rare stretch of solitude. I decided to tackle a small, innocuous task, locating the warranty for our new smart thermostat, which had been acting up. Arthur, meticulous to a fault, kept all our important documents in a heavy oak filing cabinet in his study. With a cane for support, I slowly made my way there, the familiar scent of old paper and polished wood a comforting presence. I found the cabinet unlocked, which was unusual for Arthur, who prided himself on security. As I sifted through the neatly labeled folders, household bills, insurance, taxes, my fingers brushed against a slim, unmarked envelope tucked deep behind the investment portfolios section. Curiosity, a trait that had served me well throughout my life, pricked at me. It felt out of place, subtly different from Arthur's usual fastidious organization. I pulled it out. Inside, nestled between what appeared to be old, discarded bank statements, was a single, recent document. It was a statement from an account I didn't recognize, bearing the name Horizon Holdings LLC. My breath hitched. We had always been transparent about our finances, every account, every investment, discussed and decided upon together. This was entirely new. My eyes scanned the balance, a staggering sum, far larger than anything we currently held in our joint savings. But it wasn't the large number that sent a chill down my spine. It was the series of recent transactions listed below it. Large, round figures transferred out with alarming frequency, often to accounts with cryptic alphanumeric codes. My fingers, still a little numb from the lingering effects of the surgery, trembled as I held the paper.
Ow.
The last time I'd checked, our joint savings, just before my surgery, it had held a comfortable 7-figure sum, the culmination of our lifelong efforts, our nest egg for retirement, our safety net. This Horizon Holdings account, however, seemed to be a conduit, funnel through which vast sums were disappearing. A cold, hard knot formed in my stomach. I didn't scream. I didn't call Arthur demanding answers. Instead, a lifetime of quiet. Observation and a deep-seated instinct for self-preservation kicked in. I photographed the statement with my phone, ensuring every detail was captured. Then carefully, meticulously, I returned it to its exact hiding place. I even made sure the envelope was tucked in precisely as I'd found it, leaving no trace of my discovery. Then, with a practiced calm that surprised even myself, I resumed my search for the thermostat warranty, as if my world hadn't just fractured into a million pieces. Something deep inside me, the part that had noticed Arthur's increasingly frequent late nights at the office, the subtle evasiveness in his eyes when I asked about his day, the growing emotional distance that had settled between us like a fine dust, that part had been waiting for this moment. It was the confirmation of a suspicion I hadn't dared to voice, a whisper of unease that had grown steadily louder in the quiet corners of my mind. "Beatrice, darling, I'm home." Arthur's cheerful voice echoed from the front hall, pulling me back to the present. I straightened, leaning heavily on my cane, and called back, my voice remarkably steady. "Just in the study, dear. Looking for that thermostat warranty. It's playing up again." I emerged, holding the warranty triumphantly, a mask of domestic normalcy firmly in place. Our elegant Tudor-style home in the quiet, tree-lined neighborhood of Oak Ridge continued its placid rhythm. The aroma of Arthur's favorite lasagna, which he'd promised to make for dinner, already wafted from the kitchen. Everything appeared unchanged, yet nothing was the same. The veneer of our perfect life had cracked, and through it I saw a glimpse of a darker truth. I knew with chilling certainty that the man I had shared my life with for over 40 years was not who I thought he was. And I knew with equal certainty that I would uncover every last secret he was hiding. That night Arthur served his famous lasagna, a dish he knew I adored. He complimented the meal, asked about my recovery with an almost theatrical concern, and spoke of his day with a casual ease that was utterly convincing. I watched him across the polished dining table, this man I had been married to for over 4 decades, with new, dispassionate eyes. How easily the conversation flowed, how convincing. His interest in my well-being was any of it real? Was any of our shared history more than a carefully constructed facade? "Beatrice, you're quiet tonight," he observed, reaching for his wine glass. "Headache again?" I smiled, a practiced, gentle curve of my lips. "Just thinking about the upcoming charity gala, dear. So many moving pieces." I managed our family's small but highly successful philanthropic foundation, and the annual gala was our largest event. He nodded, seemingly satisfied with my explanation. "You'll nail it. You always do." His words, once a source of pride, now felt like a patronizing dismissal of my intelligence. After dinner, as Arthur settled into the den with his laptop, ostensibly to catch up on emails, I cleaned the kitchen slowly, methodically, my mind racing, through possibilities, each more devastating than the last. The sheer scale of the disappearing funds wasn't just financial betrayal. It was a statement about what he valued, what he was willing to sacrifice. It was a calculated act, not a momentary lapse. I waited until Arthur went upstairs to shower, the sound of the water a signal that he was momentarily preoccupied. With a quiet determination that belied my physical weakness, I slipped into the den. His laptop, usually secured, was still open. He had cleared his browser history, something he never used to do, a telltale sign of concealed activity. My heart pounded, a frantic drumbeat against my ribs. I knew his habits, his routines, his digital footprint. This deviation was a glaring red flag. I opened his leather briefcase, which lay casually on the floor beside his chair. Tucked beneath a stack of financial reports, found it, a receipt from the Azure Coast Resort dated just 2 weeks prior. The amount, a staggering $1,200 for a deluxe ocean view suite. My heart pounded even harder. We hadn't been on a trip in months, certainly not to a luxury resort. This was not a business expense. This was personal, I photographed it, the flash a silent accusation in the dimly lit room. Then carefully, precisely, returned it to its exact position. That night, I lay beside Arthur in bed, listening to his breathing deepen into sleep. The man I'd chosen to build a life with, to grow old with, was systematically dismantling our financial security. And for what? The betrayal felt physical, like a crushing weight pressing against my chest. At 3 a.m., unable to sleep, I slipped out of bed and padded to our home office. Using the emergency key I'd kept hidden for years, a tiny, almost forgotten relic of my grandmother's insistence on always having a back door, I unlocked Arthur's personal filing cabinet. What I found made me sink into the office chair, hand pressed to my mouth to stifle any sound. Multiple transactions carefully spaced over the past 6 months showed money moved from our joint investment accounts to our joint checking account, then immediately transferred out to an account number I didn't recognize. Small amounts at first, $10,000, then larger sums, $50,000, $100,000, as time went on. But Arthur had made a critical mistake on one transfer form. In the memo line he'd written, in his distinctive, elegant script, phrase he'd failed to erase completely, Emerald Bay Deposit for Celeste. The name hung in the air like smoke, a phantom presence in our quiet home. I photographed everything, every statement, every transfer record, every damning detail. Then, meticulously, I returned each document to its place, leaving no trace of my intrusion. The eastern sky began to lighten outside our window, painting the world in soft hues of rose and gold. I made a decision. I wouldn't confront Arthur. Not yet. This wasn't a momentary lapse or a single betrayal. This was calculated, sustained deception. And somewhere out there was a woman named Celeste who was benefiting from our stolen future. I sent a text. To Martha, my oldest friend and a retired forensic accountant need to meet. Important. Coffee at 8 a.m. My place flooded. Make it 9 at the Gilded Bean. She replied almost immediately, despite the early hour. Martha never slept well, trait that had served her career investigating financial crimes with ruthless efficiency. By 7 a.m., I'd made myself a cup of tea, dressed in one of my more expensive business outfits, armor for the day ahead.
Big meeting today, dear.
Arthur asked, adjusting his tie in the hallway mirror as he prepared for his morning walk. Potential new clients, I replied, not a lie. I was indeed meeting someone. New, the version of me who wouldn't accept this betrayal. Arthur kissed my cheek before leaving. That's my Beatrice, always hustling. See you tonight. Be late. Quarterly reports due. I watched him walk to his car, so confident, so certain of his world and his place in it. He had no idea that while he'd been dismantling our future piece by piece, I'd been keeping a secret of my own. My great-aunt, Eleanor, a formidable woman who had lived life on her own terms, had left me a substantial inheritance when she passed 20 years ago. Property in the south of France, diversified investments, and a trust that had grown steadily. Never tell a soul what you have, she'd instructed during our last conversation. Not even your husband. A woman must always have her own safety net, especially when you think you're most secure. I'd followed her advice, partly out of respect. Partly because her insistence had triggered a small, quiet alarm in me I couldn't explain. That inheritance, now worth just over $2.5 million, had remained my silent insurance policy, managed through a separate financial advisor Arthur had never met. I hadn't touched a penny of it, continuing to work, contributing to our family finances from my foundation's earnings as I always had. As I drove to meet Martha, the morning traffic flowed around me, commuters heading to offices, schools, the rhythms of ordinary life. But I was crossing a threshold, moving from a woman who believed implicitly in her marriage to one who understood it had been built on quicksand. By the time I parked at the Gilded Bean, my shock had crystallized into something colder, more focused. I wasn't just a betrayed wife. I was a woman whose future had been robbed, and I had resources Arthur knew nothing about. Martha was all ready. At a corner table, 2 coffees waiting, her sharp, intelligent eyes assessed me as I approached. Whatever it is, she said, without preamble, We'll fix it. I placed my phone on the table, screen up. Arthur emptied our retirement fund. I need to know where the money went, who Celeste is, and what I'm really dealing with before I make my next move. Martha didn't gasp or offer platitudes. Instead, she nodded once. Show me everything. Sitting across from Martha at the gilded bean, I asked the questions that had circled my mind all night. How long had he been planning this? Was any of it ever real? Do you know what it's like to make breakfast for someone who's stealing your future? Martha's expression remained neutral, professional, but I saw the flash of anger in her eyes. We'd been friends since college. She'd been my maid of honor, a witness to the early, hopeful days of my marriage to Arthur. She knew the Beatrice, who had believed in him, who had trusted him with our finances, while I built our philanthropic endeavors. You need to understand what you're up against, she said quietly, leaning forward. This isn't just about money disappearing. This is about calculated deception. I wrapped my hands around my coffee cup, drawing warmth from it while something cold settled in my chest. I keep thinking about the day we opened those joint investment accounts. Arthur made this big speech about how we were securing our golden years, building a legacy. My voice caught. I thought it was beautiful, that he was beautiful. Don't do that, Martha said gently. Don't question every memory. That's exactly what he wants for you to doubt yourself. I nodded, though. The questions continued to swirl. Had he already been planning this back then? Had he been looking for ways out, even as we'd built our life together? Or was this a more recent betrayal, a desperate grasp at something new, something exciting, perhaps fueled by the fear of my surgery? I need to keep it together, I said, straightening my shoulders. Not until I have a plan. Getting this right means being strategic, not just reactive, Martha agreed. The idea of performance, of continuing to play the role of the recovering, trusting wife while investigating my husband's betrayal, felt surreal, yet I knew it was necessary. If Arthur realized I'd discovered his theft, he might accelerate. Whatever plan he had in motion, I keep asking myself what I missed, I admitted. There must have been signs. Martha's expression softened. Beatrice, people like Arthur, people who can compartmentalize this effectively, they don't. Leave obvious signs. That's how they succeed. This isn't about what you failed to see. This is about what he deliberately hid. I thought about the small changes over the past year. Arthur's new golf trips that seemed to multiply. The password on his phone changing from our anniversary date to a complex alphanumeric code. His sudden interest in a new exclusive social club I wasn't invited to. Each one explainable, reasonable, and each one, in retrospect, a thread in a larger pattern. I feel like I've been living in a house where the foundation was crumbling, but all I noticed were squeaky floorboards. I said. We spent the next hour creating a timeline, mapping out when the transfers began, when Arthur's behavior had shifted. Martha took detailed notes, her investigator's mind already working through angles I hadn't considered. The Emerald Bay. Deposit, that's concrete, she said. Property transactions leave records. If he's buying real estate for this Celeste, we'll find it. I flinched at the name Celeste. Someone real, not just an abstract threat. Someone who had participated. In stealing my future? What if our entire marriage has been? I asked, voicing my deepest fear. Stop, Martha interrupted firmly. You can drive yourself crazy with what-ifs, but they don't help you move forward. Focus on what we know, what we can prove. The practical approach helped anchor me, but it couldn't completely quiet the emotional storm. 40 plus. Years of marriage, countless shared moments, holidays, achievements, losses, ordinary Tuesday nights Saul, now cast in shadow. I thought I'd known this man, but the Arthur who could systematically drain our retirement funds was a stranger. What's the worst part? Martha asked after a moment, her voice gentler. I considered the question, the betrayal. Deception, the theft, the other woman. The premeditation, I finally answered. This wasn't a mistake or a moment of weakness. This was calculated. He looked at our shared future and saw something he could take. Martha nodded. What will matter legally, too? As she outlined next steps, I felt a shifting inside me, grief giving way to resolve. I thought of my great-aunt Eleanor, whose inheritance I'd protected all these years. She'd survived the Great Depression, raised her siblings alone, built a successful import-export business in an era when women weren't welcome in that field. "Life will break your heart, Beatrice," she'd told me once, "but it can't break your spine unless you let it." I wouldn't let it. By the time we finished our meeting, I had a plan. I would continue normal life at home while Martha used her professional resources to trace the money and identify Celeste more completely. I would document everything, secure copies of all financial records, and consult with a divorce attorney without Arthur's knowledge. "Don't tip your hand," Martha warned as we prepared to leave. "Men like Arthur get dangerous when cornered." I thought about the man who'd kissed my cheek that morning, the husband who'd helped me with my physical therapy exercises last night. Was he capable of something truly dangerous? The fact that I didn't immediately know the answer told me how much had already been lost. Outside the cafe, the spring air carried the first hint of new beginnings. In normal years, this season meant planning our annual garden party, preparing for our summer travels, the familiar rhythms of our comfortable life. "How do I face him tonight?" asked Martha as we walked to our cars. "How do I sit across from him at dinner, knowing what I know?" She squeezed my arm. "You remember that every day you keep him in the dark is a day you're gaining strength and information. This isn't just performance, Beatrice. It's protection for you." I nodded, straightening my shoulders. As I drove home, I thought about the philanthropic project I needed to finish. The foundation board meeting next week, the rhythms of life continuing as the ground shifted beneath me. By the time I pulled into our driveway, I had composed my face into a mask of normalcy. I was no longer just Beatrice Williams, wife and foundation director. I was a woman with a mission, gathering intelligence behind enemy lines. The enemy, inconceivably, was the man who'd vowed to love and protect me. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The morning after my meeting with Martha, a quiet determination settled over me, replacing the initial shock and dread. I was no longer merely a betrayed wife. I was a woman on a mission, fueled by a fierce resolve to protect what remained of my life and dignity. My first priority was to secure my financial standing and begin the legal process. I knew instinctively that speed and discretion were paramount. Arthur, for all his meticulous planning, operated under the assumption of my ignorance and my post-surgical vulnerability. This was my leverage, a brief window of opportunity before he realized his grand scheme was unraveling. My initial action was to establish completely independent financial accounts. I drove to a bank across town, one where Arthur had no connections or existing relationships. The branch manager, a kindly woman named Clara, listened with a professional yet empathetic demeanor as I explained my need for new, separate checking and savings accounts. I transferred a substantial portion of my personal funds, derived from my great-aunt Honor's inheritance, into these new accounts. This was not about draining shared assets, but about safeguarding my independent resources, creating a clear, unassailable division between my personal wealth and the marital finances Arthur had so brazenly plundered. Clara, discreetly noting my pale complexion and the faint tremor in my hands, offered silent support, reassuring me that all new accounts would be flagged for heightened security and that no information would be shared with any third party. Without my explicit in-person authorization, it was a small but crucial step, a concrete act of taking control after weeks of feeling utterly powerless. Next, I called Leo Maxwell, the divorce attorney Martha had recommended. Leo's downtown office was a study in understated professionalism. Dark wood, leather-bound books, and a hushed atmosphere that conveyed both competence and confidentiality. "I'm not sure I need a divorce lawyer," I told him when we met the following day. Feeling the awkwardness of articulating my situation to a stranger, I just need to understand my options. Leo, with his calm demeanor and methodical approach, reminded me of my own father, practical, unflappable. "Most people who sit in that chair say the same thing," he observed, his voice a quiet rumble. "Understanding options is always the right first step." I outlined what I'd discovered so far: the transferred funds, the removed access to our long-standing joint investment accounts, the mysterious withdrawals. the Azure Coast Resort receipt, and the chilling mention of Celeste. None of this is definitive proof of anything specific, I acknowledged, still clinging to a sliver of hope for an innocent explanation. It could be poor communication, or poor judgment, or Mrs. Williams, Leo interrupted. Gently, in my 30 years of practice, I've never seen these patterns in a marriage that wasn't heading toward dissolution, either planned or already in progress. The words landed like stones, heavy and cold. Despite my suspicions, hearing an objective professional confirm them brought a different kind of pain. A stark confirmation of the reality I was facing. Based on what you've described, he continued, your husband appears to be systematically separating assets and establishing independent financial structures. This is often preparation for a divorce filing, typically by the spouse moving the assets. My mind reeled. Byron Ben Rouse on Ribbendinemer at all. Planning a divorce without my knowledge, even as he nurtured me through recovery? The sheer audacity of it was staggering. But our retirement funds, I pressed, those were for our future, our security. Unfortunately, despite their designated purpose, joint funds are often treated as marital assets unless very specifically structured otherwise, Leo explained. If he had account access, he likely had legal authority to move them. I thought about those accounts, built painstakingly over decades, funded consistently, the bedrock of our planned golden years. Our future security, gone. What do I do now, I asked. You outlined 3 immediate steps. Document everything without alerting Arthur. Secure copies of all financial records. And protect whatever assets remained under your control. Then, I ventured the question that had been burning in my mind. What about my inheritance? My Gret and Eleanor's trust? Arthur doesn't know the details. It's managed separately. For the first time, Leo looked genuinely pleased. That's potentially very significant. Inherited assets kept separate from marital finances can often remain protected in divorce proceedings. Do you have documentation showing you've maintained it separately? I nodded, a flicker of my grandmother's quiet wisdom shining through. Complete records. I've never commingled those funds with our joint accounts? Good. Keep it that way, he advised. And gather those records as well. As I left his office, my phone buzzed with a text from Martha. Found something. Meet me at the quiet corner. We met at a small, unassuming coffee shop in a neighborhood Arthur never visited. Martha arrived with a slim folder and a grim expression. The Celeste connection checks out, she said without preamble. Celeste Dubois, 38, real estate developer with Sterling Group, specializes in luxury condo conversions downtown. She slid a photograph across the table. The same woman I'd vaguely recalled seeing Arthur with at a charity event months ago, though I dismissed it as a casual acquaintance at the time. She recently closed on 3 units in the Pinnacle Towers development last quarter, Martha continued, including Unit 21B, which closed last month. Purchase price, $1.8 million. Buyer, Silverleaf Holdings LLC. My mouth went dry. And Silverleaf is a shell company formed 8 months ago, Martha added, her voice softening slightly. The registered agent is a corporate services firm that specializes in privacy. But the LLC's banking is done through Capitol Heights Bank, the same bank where our records show. Arthur has been making significant transfers from your joint accounts. There's more, Martha said, her voice tightening. Celeste Dubois's public social media is mostly professional, but she has a private Instagram account under Celeste Living. It's locked. But her profile picture shows her with a man. She hesitated. The man's face isn't visible. But the watch is distinctive. She showed me her phone screen. The image showed Celeste laughing, champagne glass raised, leaning against a man whose face was turned away. But on his wrist was the vintage Rolex I'd given Arthur for his 60th birthday. Custom engraved on the back with our shared motto, ad infinitum. Something shifted inside me, a final barrier between suspicion and certainty giving way. Arthur wasn't just preparing for divorce. He was building a new life with another woman, using our family's resources to do it. The timing lined up. The transfer started right around when Silverleaf Holdings was formed. The condo purchase closed just after my surgery when he assumed I was completely out of commission. He's buying her a condo with our retirement. Money, I whispered, the words catching in my throat. Beatrice, Martha said carefully, based on the transfer patterns, I think the condo might be just part of it. The regular transfers suggest ongoing support, possibly setting her up financially. The implications crashed over me, not just an affair, but a complete parallel life being constructed a life. Arthur was funding by systematically dismantling our shared financial foundation. What's the next step? I asked, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. You need to secure what's left, Martha advised. And you need to understand exactly what you're facing before confronting him. That evening, I called my financial advisor, Mr. Davies, who managed my gritante Eleanor's inheritance. My gritante's trust had been in his firm's care for decades. Beatrice, good to hear from you, he greeted me warmly. Everything okay? You don't usually call after hours? I need to verify the current status of my trust, said my voice carefully modulated. And I need to make sure no changes can be made without my explicit in-person authorization. There was a pause, as someone attempted to make. Changes? My heart stuttered. Have there been requests? Your husband called last week, Mr. Davies said carefully. He asked about consolidating your inheritance with some other investments he's managing. I explained that wasn't possible, given the trust structure you're great and established. Cold anger replaced the shock. Arthur had not only stolen from our joint funds, he'd attempted to access my protected inheritance, the one thing my great-aunt had insisted I keep separate. Mr. Davies, I need you to lock down everything, I said. No information to anyone but me. No changes. No distributions without my in-person notarized authorization. And I need full documentation of the trust's current holdings. Beatrice, this sounds serious. Is everything all right? No, I answered truthfully. It will be. That night, I lay awake beside Arthur. Studying his profile in the darkness, the steady breathing, the familiar shape of him, all suddenly rendered strange. I thought about the photos lining our hallway, the vacation memories, the life we'd documented so carefully. How much of it had been real? When had he started planning his exit? More importantly, when had he decided our shared future was an acceptable price to pay for his new beginning? As dawn broke, I made my decision. I would not confront Arthur yet, not until I had secured everything possible and understood the full scope of what we were facing. But I would no longer doubt what was happening. My husband was stealing our family's future piece by piece, and somehow he'd convinced himself he was entitled to do it. The key to Arthur's private safety deposit box, a small, innocuous brass key I'd found taped inside his old university yearbook, burned in my pocket. I'd made a copy at a hardware store far from our neighborhood, returning the original to its hiding place in his study. Now, I stood in the lobby of First Continental Bank, my heart pounding. I need to access box 779, I told the attendant. Sliding over the key and my ID, I'll need Mr. Williams present. Mrs. Williams, she replied politely. The box registration doesn't list you as an authorized user. Another exclusion, another secret. Outside, I called Martha. Oh. Luck at the bank, I reported. The safety deposit box is in his name only. I've got something else, she said. Silverleaf Holdings LLC made another significant purchase last week. A yacht? A yacht? I repeated, bewildered. A 40-foot sleek cruiser, docked at Anchors Away Marina. Purchase price, $850,000. The amount staggered me. Combined with the condo, Arthur had spent nearly $3 million money that included our hard-earned retirement. I'll assign luxury assets for this new life. There's a registration celebration scheduled for Friday, Martha continued. The yacht's name is New Horizons. The symbolism wasn't subtle. Arthur wasn't just having an affair. He was christening his fresh start with exorbitant gifts, funded by our shared future. That evening, I made dinner while Arthur worked late. This quiet time was a rare luxury, allowing me to search Arthur's office, looking specifically for anything related to Silverleaf Holdings. In his desk drawer, beneath a stack of old warranties, I found a sealed envelope addressed to a Williams managing member, Silverleaf Holdings LLC. Inside was a property tax notice for the condo at Pinnacle Towers. My hands trembled as I photographed the document. The tax assessment valued the property at $1.9 million, even more than the purchase price Martha had discovered. As I carefully returned the envelope, my phone buzzed with a text from Clara at the bank. Need to speak with you. Urgent. We met before the bank opened the next morning, her normally cheerful demeanor replaced with professional concern. Beatrice, I've been reviewing the transaction history you asked about, she began. Yesterday, there was a significant development. Mr. Williams initiated wire transfers to close out all remaining joint investment accounts. My stomach dropped. All of them. Everything. She confirmed. Over $700,000 in remaining liquid assets, all transferred to external accounts. Can we stop it? I asked, a desperate plea in my voice. She shook her head, not without a joint request or court order. When were these requests made? Today afternoon, approximately 4:30 p.m. Right after, I'd visited First Continental Bank, asking about his safety deposit box. Someone had alerted him. He knew I was investigating. There's one more thing, Clara added hesitantly. Mr. Williams called personally this morning to confirm the transfers. He mentioned he'd be out of the country starting Friday for about 2 weeks, Friday, the yacht celebration. The timing crystallized. Arthur wasn't just transferring money. He was preparing to leave. By noon, I was sitting in Leo Maxwell's office again. He's making his move, Leo observed. The timing suggests he knows you're investigating, and he's speeding up his timeline. What can we do? I asked. File immediately, Leo advised. Emergency motion to freeze marital assets, including the condo and the yacht. We can be in court tomorrow morning if you're ready to proceed. Was I ready to formally end my 40-year marriage? To reveal Arthur's deception to the world? But the alternative was worse. Letting Arthur complete his plan, leaving me with nothing. Do it, I said, my voice firm, resolute. My recovery might have been a weakness in his eyes, but it had unwittingly become my strength. Giving me the time and the motivation to uncover his betrayal and fight back, I paused at our front door. My hand on the cool brass knob, steeling myself for what awaited inside. The weight of everything I'd discovered pressed down on me, not just the financial betrayal, but the calculated nature of it all. The chilling realization that the man I loved had been systematically dismantling our life while feigning unwavering devotion. When I entered, the house was quiet, filled with the familiar sense of polished wood and my favorite jasmine potpourri. Arthur stood in the kitchen, leaning against the counter, phone in hand, his back to me.
Yes.
He looked up, his movements fluid and unhurried. You're home early, I said, keeping my voice neutral, my tone betraying nothing of the maelstrom. Raging within me, meeting finished sooner than expected. He studied me carefully, his eyes, usually warm and reassuring, now holding an unsettling glint. You've been busy today. The statement hung in the air, not a question, but an accusation. Someone had warned him, have I? I moved to the refrigerator, outwardly calm despite my racing heart, and poured myself a glass of iced tea, my back to him, giving myself a moment to compose. Cut the act, Beatrice. His voice hardened, devoid of its usual gentle cadence. I know you've been looking into our accounts, asking questions at the bank. My secretary informed me. I turned to face him, my gaze unwavering. And I know you've emptied our retirement funds to buy property and a yacht for your girlfriend, Celeste Dubois. The statement landed like a physical blow. For a moment, Arthur's composed facade cracked, surprise then calculation flashing across his face. His jaw tightened, a vein throbbing visibly at his temple. That's not what happened, he began, his voice surprisingly steady despite the tremor in his hands. Don't. I held up my hand, stopping him mid-sentence. I have the transaction. Records, Arthur. I know about Silverleaf Holdings. I know about Celeste Dubois and her specialty in hiding assets during divorces. I know about the safety deposit box, the condo at Pinnacle Towers, and the yacht named New Horizons. I know everything. He stared at me, reassessing, his mind visibly scrambling to catch up, to understand how I, his recovering, supposedly, naive wife could possibly possess such damning information? "No, it's not what you think," he insisted, his voice regaining some of its earlier composure, though a thread of desperation now ran through it. "The money is still for us. I am just protecting it in case. In case of market instability, I was going to consolidate it all, create a new, more robust portfolio." "In case what, Arthur?" My voice remained steady, a quiet force. "In case you somehow spent our future. I wasn't the one transferring it to a shell company to buy luxury real estate and pleasure crafts." He began to pace the kitchen, agitation breaking through his carefully constructed control. His movements were jerky, his usual elegant stride replaced by a restless energy. "You don't understand the financial pressures I've been under," he argued, his voice rising, a note of self-pity creeping in. "The market conditions, the firm's expectations.
I was trying to maximize our returns
to ensure we had an even better future." "Stop it." The sharpness in my tone made him look up, his eyes narrowing. "This isn't about market conditions. It's about you stealing from our joint future to finance your exit strategy." Silence filled the kitchen, heavy and suffocating. Then Arthur's demeanor changed, morphing from panicked defensiveness to a cold, almost chilling efficiency. "You've always been naive about finances, Beatrice. That's why I've handled them." His tone was dismissive, almost pitying, a tone I had heard countless times over the years when I dared to question a complex investment. "What's happening now is just restructuring. Everything will be addressed in the divorce." "The divorce?" I echoed, the word feeling alien, foreign in our familiar kitchen. So casual, so matter-of-fact, as if discussing a business transaction rather than dissolving our entire family and future. "When were you planning to tell me?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper, yet it cut through the air with a chilling precision. "Before or after your trip with Celeste on your new yacht?" His eyes narrowed, a flicker of something akin to rage crossing his features. "You've been having me followed." "I didn't need to," I replied, leaning against the counter, suddenly exhausted by the performance we were maintaining, the intricate dance of deception and revelation. "Your financial footprints were clear enough. How long, Arthur?" I asked, the raw question tearing through my composure. "How long have you been planning this?" He hesitated, then shrugged slightly, a gesture of casual indifference that felt like a punch to the gut. "Does it matter?" In that moment, I saw him clearly, perhaps for the first time in our long marriage. Not as the man I'd loved, revered, and trusted for 40 years, but as he truly was, calculating, entitled, completely disconnected from the impact of his actions on me, on our shared life. Beatrice. Arthur. I replied, my voice quiet but firm, imbued with a strength he had clearly underestimated. "It matters when I reflect on every moment we shared, knowing you were building a separate life behind my back." His phone buzzed, a sharp, insistent vibration. He glanced at it, then back at me, a flicker of urgency in his eyes. "This conversation isn't productive. We can discuss division of assets through our attorneys. My attorney has already filed an emergency motion to freeze all assets connected to Silverleaf Holdings," I informed him, watching his face closely for a reaction. "The hearing is tomorrow morning." His face hardened, the mask of control slipping back into place, replaced by a cold fury. "You've been busy, so have you," I countered, transferring the remaining $700,000 from our joint accounts. Today was especially productive. For a moment, raw anger flashed across his features, a visceral reaction to being outmaneuvered. Then his phone buzzed again, insistently. "I need to take this," he said, already moving toward the door. "Of course you do. I didn't try to stop him." Celeste must be wondering about her yacht celebration on Friday, after he left. I stood alone in our kitchen, surrounded by the trappings of the life we'd built, the custom cabinetry, the gleaming granite countertops, the antique clock ticking serenely on the wall, suddenly feeling foreign, tainted. How quickly it had all unraveled. I moved through the house as if in a dream, touching familiar objects that suddenly felt foreign. In our bedroom, Arthur's closet door stood ajar. Inside, I noticed gaps on the rack where clothing had been, removed discreetly, carefully. He'd already started packing, preparing for his departure, for his new life. The fear and shock that had initially dominated my response to Arthur's betrayal were slowly replaced by something stronger. A clear determination to protect what mattered most, my future, my independence, my very sense of self. Morning arrived with deceptive normalcy, sunlight streaming through kitchen windows, coffee brewing, the gentle hum of the refrigerator. Arthur hadn't returned, but his absences weren't unusual enough to raise immediate questions from any casual observer. This suited me perfectly. At 8:15 a.m., I arrived at the courthouse to meet Leo. He was waiting outside the assigned courtroom. Briefcase in hand, his expression serious. Arthur's attorney filed an emergency response at 7 a.m., he informed me. Gerald Hoffman, aggressive, expensive, revoices in high-asset divorces. Arthur works fast, I observed, my voice devoid of emotion. Means he's been preparing for this longer than we thought. Hoffman doesn't take cases without substantial retainers. Inside the courtroom, I sat beside Leo at the plaintiff's table. At precisely 9:08 a.m., the door opened, and Arthur entered with a silver-haired man in an impeccable suit. Met briefly. His expression was neutral, controlled, revealing nothing of the man who had shared my bed for almost 2 decades. Judge Evelyn Haze entered, a tall woman in her 60s with sharp eyes and a reputation for efficiency and fairness. After reviewing the filings, she addressed the court. Leo presented our case methodically. The discovered transfers, the shell company, the luxury purchases, the systematic emptying of joint accounts. He submitted the financial records Martha had uncovered, highlighting Celeste Dubois's pattern of involvement in similar cases. He spoke calmly, clearly laying out the timeline of deception with an undeniable logic. When Gerald Hoffman rose next, his voice smoothly confident, he exuded an aura of dismissive superiority. Your Honor, he began, Mr. Williams categorically denies any improper financial management. The transfers in question represent strategic investment decisions made in his professional capacity as the family's financial manager. Mrs. Williams has limited understanding of complex investment structures. I felt a flash of anger. A familiar sting, but kept my expression neutral, my face a mask of calm. Judge Haze interrupted, her voice crisp. Mr. Hoffman, the documentation shows Mr. Williams as the sole managing member of Silverleaf Holdings, LLC, a professional capacity. Your Honor, distinct from personal ownership, Hoffman retorted, unflustered. The judge reviewed the documents again, her expression skeptical. And the yacht named New Horizons. The condominium. Are these also professional investments for multiple clients? Hoffman hesitated slightly. They represent diversified asset allocation within the investment portfolio, purchased with funds directly transferred from accounts specifically designated for the Williams retirement security, Judge Haze noted, looking over her reading glasses. After 40 years of marriage, one would expect such a significant reallocation of assets to be a joint decision, particularly when the principal investor, Mrs. Williams, has recently undergone major surgery and was, by Mr. Williams' own admission, out of commission. The air in the courtroom crackled with unspoken tension. After 30 more minutes of arguments, Judge Haze made her ruling, a temporary freeze on all assets connected to Silverleaf Holdings, LLC, including the condo and yacht, a prohibition on any further transfers from joint accounts, and expedited financial discovery. It was a partial victory, but a crucial one. Arthur's confident posture crumbled, replaced by a visible shock. Outside the courtroom, Arthur caught up to me as Leo stepped away to make a call. This is unnecessary drama, he said, his voice low, filled with a barely contained fury. We could have worked this out privately. I turned to face him, my gaze level. Like you worked out emptying our retirement funds privately. His jaw tightened. I was reorganizing assets for better returns. If you'd waited for what? For you to finish transferring everything before serving me with divorce papers? For you to sail away on New Horizons with Celeste, while I was left with nothing? His expression hardened. You're making this messy. You're letting Emotion cloud your judgment. The audacity stunned me. I'm making it messy. You stole from our shared future, Arthur. Keep your voice down, he hissed, glancing around the courthouse hallway. Why? Afraid someone might hear the truth? The respected financial advisor, Arthur Williams, robbed his own wife? Stepped closer, his voice dangerously low. You have no idea what you're dealing with, Beatrice. It's no idea what I can do. Before I could respond, Leo returned, positioning himself slightly between us. Mrs. Williams, we should go. Arthur backed away, his mask of control slipping back into place. This isn't finished. You're right about that, I agreed, turning to Leo. That evening, my phone buzzed with a text from Arthur. We need to discuss financial arrangements. Meeting with attorneys tomorrow, 2 p.m. Without your inheritance information, settlement discussions are incomplete. There it was, the first direct reference to my inheritance. Arthur was already shifting his attention to the money he hadn't known about, the resources he couldn't control. I forwarded the message to Leo without responding to Arthur. Within minutes, Leo called. Classic fishing expedition, he observed. He's realized there's money he didn't account for, and he wants details. What should I do? Nothing directly, Leo instructed. I'll respond through proper channels, reiterating that your inheritance is separate property, maintained independently throughout the marriage. The specific details are irrelevant to the divorce proceedings. As I hung up, I felt a strange sense of calm. Arthur had always believed he maintained the upper hand through financial control. Now, discovering my independent resources, he was scrambling to reassert that control. But the groundwork I'd laid, legal, financial, emotional, and practical, had created a foundation he couldn't easily undermine. For perhaps the first time in our marriage, I held a position of strength he hadn't anticipated. The power had shifted. The morning of the hearing arrived, cloaked in a deceptive normalcy that belied the monumental shift occurring in my life. I woke before dawn, the quiet of the house amplifying the nervous flutter in my stomach. I made coffee in the tranquil kitchen, its aroma a grounding presence. Received a text from Martha. Interesting development. Call when you can. Dialed her immediately. Celeste Dubois cleared out her condo last night, Martha reported when I called. Moved everything out between 10 p.m. and 2 a.m. Her car's gone too. Ouch. Not just her personal belongings, but even some of the furniture. I documented from the luxury staging photos she'd posted. You think she's planning to disappear? I asked, a cold knot forming in my stomach. If the judge makes the asset freeze permanent, it's a strong possibility, she confirmed. People like Celeste don't typically abandon established high-value residences overnight unless they're implementing contingency plans. And her firm has removed all her listings online as of this morning. This was a significant turn. Celeste's sudden vanishing act hinted at a deeper level of pre-planning, perhaps even a pre-arranged escape route, and it confirmed her complicity. In Arthur's schemes, I immediately called Leo, who decided to adjust our approach for the hearing. We need to directly address flight risk in today's hearing, he stated, his voice brisk with renewed urgency. I'll prepare a supplemental filing requesting passport surrender for both Arthur and Ms. Dubois. This is compelling evidence that their intent was not merely financial restructuring, but outright concealment and potential evasion of legal repercussions. I felt a grim satisfaction. Celeste's desperate maneuver might just be the final nail in Arthur's carefully constructed coffin. By mid-morning, I met Leo at his office to review our updated strategy. Arthur's legal team filed a last-minute brief an hour ago, he informed me, showing me a document challenging Martha's preliminary findings and attempting to discredit my financial literacy. They specifically targeted Howard Griffith's testimony, Arthur's former boss, claiming professional disagreements during Arthur's employment rather than concerns about his judgment with client funds. This is deliberately misleading, I noted, a controlled fury rising within me. Howard was concerned about Arthur's handling of client funds, not just a personality clash. Exactly, Leo agreed, presenting his response with documentation from the firm's HR files showing specific concerns about Arthur's financial judgment, internal memos documenting pattern recognition failures, client complaints, and formal warnings about compliance issues. Arthur, it seemed, had a history of questionable financial practices. His departure from his previous firm had been far from a mutually agreed-upon strategic career advancement. We finalized our presentation. Strategy with Leo emphasizing the importance of maintaining composure. Arthur's attorney will try to provoke emotional responses, he warned, to support their narrative that you're acting from jealousy and a lack of financial understanding, rather than legitimate financial concerns. They will portray you as irrational as the hysterical woman. Do not give them that opening. I nodded, recalling the dismissal in Arthur's voice the night before. I would not succumb. I would be calm, factual, and unwavering. At noon, Arthur called unexpectedly. Beatrice, we should talk before the hearing, he said, his voice unusually strained, lacking its usual condescending tone. Privately. I don't think that's appropriate, I replied, my tone neutral even. Our attorneys should handle any communications. This isn't about legal strategy, he insisted, his tone shifting to one I recognized. Reasonable. Slightly paternalistic, meant to make me doubt myself. Beatrice, financial management isn't your strength. These structures seem complicated to you, but they're standard practice in wealth management. Then you'll have no trouble explaining them to Judge Haze, I replied evenly. Terminating the call. At 1:30 p.m., I arrived at the courthouse. As I approached the grand stone entrance, I saw a small group waiting on the steps. Mirabelle had driven in from her retirement community, her posture regal, her eyes radiating quiet strength. Next to her stood my cousin Sarah, a lawyer herself, and a steady source of emotional support. Even Arthur's estranged sister. Eleanor, who had always been quietly disapproving of her brother's materialistic tendencies, stood slightly apart from the others. Her presence a powerful, if silent, statement of support. The presence of both maternal and paternal family members sent a powerful message. This wasn't simply a battle between Arthur and me, but about accountability to the entire family, a validation of the deep ties he had attempted to sever. The entrance, I saw Arthur arriving alone from the opposite direction, his usual confident stride now lacking its customary swagger. Our eyes met across the plaza. In that brief charged connection, I saw unexpected uncertainty, a flicker of fear. The confident financial manager who had dismissed my concerns now looked momentarily shaken by the array of supporters gathered. Around me, we entered the courthouse together, not as the family we once were, but as participants in a legal proceeding that would establish the consequences of broken trust and determine the protections necessary for my future. Courtroom 302 was smaller than I expected, formal and austere, with polished wooden benches and a hushed, almost solemn atmosphere. Leo guided me to the plaintiff's table, directly facing the judge's imposing bench. Across the aisle, Arthur sat with Gerald Hoffman, their heads bent in urgent, hushed conversation, their faces grim. Judge Haze entered, her silver hair impeccably coiffed, her stern face softened slightly by decades of experience. After reviewing the case briefly, she addressed Leo. Mr. Maxwell, please present your client's position. Leo rose confidently, his voice filling the quiet room with a calm authority. Your Honor, this case involves the systematic transfer of marital retirement funds into a shell company controlled solely by the respondent, Mr. Arthur Williams. These funds were subsequently used to purchase luxury assets, specifically a condominium valued at $1.8 million and a yacht valued at $850,000. He presented the timeline of transfers from our joint investment accounts to Silverleaf Holdings, LLC. Then, to the property purchases, meticulously entering all documentation into evidence. He meticulously highlighted the key dates, showing how the transfers intensified after my surgery, coinciding precisely with Arthur's assumed period of my incapacity, when Hoffman rose for the defense. His approach was, as anticipated, dismissive. Your Honor, what we have here is a fundamental misunderstanding of sophisticated financial management by someone without expertise in investment strategies. Judge Haze leaned forward, her expression unreadable. Are you suggesting that transferring designated retirement funds to purchase a personal condominium and recreational yacht constitutes legitimate retirement investment for a 40-year marriage. Hoffman didn't flinch. Modern portfolio theory recognizes that real estate and tangible assets often provide superior returns compared to traditional savings vehicles. Mr. Williams is applying professional investment principles, attempting to diversify and grow the portfolio, especially in light of Mrs. Williams' recent health issues, which, while regrettable, placed additional burdens on Mr. Williams to manage their financial future single-handedly. His implication was clear. Arthur was the competent professional, I, the ailing, ignorant amateur. Leo called Howard Griffith first, Arthur's former boss. Howard testified about Arthur's financial judgment during his employment, his testimony concise and devastating. Thomas Williams consistently demonstrated concerning judgment regarding risk assessment. His departure from our firm was directly related to these concerns. When asked about the transfers of marital funds, Howard was unequivocal. Such transfers violate basic fiduciary principles, particularly when the funds were specifically designated for long-term procurement security and moved without the knowledge or consent of the owner. Clara, the bank manager, testified. Next, calmly establishing the timeline of transfers and contradicting Arthur's claim of routine financial management. Mrs. Williams came to me immediately, concerned about unauthorized transfers. Her questions demonstrated a clear understanding of appropriate financial boundaries. The forensic accountant, Martha, methodically outlined the pattern of concealed transfers. These transactions represent deliberate asset concealment, not legitimate investment strategy. The timing, structure, and destination of transfers are consistent with preparation for divorce and asset hiding. Throughout these testimonies, I watched Arthur's expression shift from initial confidence to growing concern, then a visible discomfort, as his narrative was systematically dismantled, piece by carefully documented piece. When it was my turn to take the stand, I felt a strange calm. I described discovering the emptied accounts, tracing the missing money, and establishing new, protected accounts from my inheritance. My voice was steady, factual, devoid of emotion. Why did you maintain your inheritance separately throughout your marriage, Mrs. Williams? Leo asked, his voice gentle. My great Eleanor established the trust with explicit instructions that it remain separate from marital assets, I explained. She believed strongly in financial independence, especially for women after living through the Depression. It was my safety net. During cross-examination, Hoffman tried to undermine me, his tone condescending. Isn't it possible you simply misunderstood legitimate investment activities undertaken by your financially sophisticated husband? I understood the bank statement showing our retirement funds reduced from a 7-figure sum to virtually nothing, I replied evenly, my voice cutting through his condescension. I understood the transfer records showing that money moving to purchase a condominium and a yacht. These aren't complex financial concepts, Mr. Hoffman. They are very clear acts of financial depletion. Isn't it true that your hasty legal action was motivated by discovering your husband's relationship with another woman rather than genuine financial concerns? He pressed, attempting to paint me as a scorned wife, emotionally lashing out. No, Mr. Hoffman, I said firmly, meeting his gaze directly. I filed for an emergency asset freeze after discovering funds designated for our retirement had been emptied and transferred into an unknown shell corporation. The motivation was protecting my financial future and security. For nearly 20 minutes, Hoffman attempted to portray me as financially naive and emotionally reactive, but I maintained my composure, directly addressing each question with factual clarity, refusing to allow him to bait me into an emotional outburst. My calm, logical responses directly contradicted his narrative. When Arthur took the stand, his familiar confidence had returned, though it felt brittle, forced. He described advanced investment strategies and portfolio diversification that would eventually benefit both of us through superior returns compared to traditional savings vehicles. Leo's cross-examination was methodical, relentless. Mr. Williams, can you explain how Mrs. Williams would access these superior returns for her retirement expenses when the assets are titled solely in your name through Silverleaf Holdings, LLC? Arthur hesitated, visibly uncomfortable. Appreciation would eventually be transferred back to appropriate accounts. When exactly? Leo pressed harder. You are well past typical retirement age. Market timing is crucial in maximizing returns, Arthur replied, avoiding the direct question. Leo pressed harder. Is Ms. Celeste Dubois listed as a co-owner or beneficiary on any Silverleaf Holdings assets? Arthur's composure cracked slightly. It's a personal matter, unrelated to the investment strategy. I'll rephrase, Leo said calmly, his voice a quiet snare. Does Miss Dubois have access to or benefit from the condominium purchased with funds transferred from Mrs. Williams's retirement accounts? Objection, Hoffman interjected, his voice sharp. Assumes facts not in evidence. Sustained. Judge Haze ruled, but her expression had darkened, a subtle shift in her posture indicating her growing skepticism. Leo then shifted tactics, playing his trump card. Mr. Williams, are you aware that Ms. Dubois has vacated her residence as of last night, removing all possessions? Arthur's head snapped up, genuine shock crossing his face. What? The reaction confirmed our suspicion. Celeste hadn't informed Arthur of her departure. Whatever their plans had been, she had apparently decided not to wait for the court's ruling. No further questions, Leo said, returning to our table. After brief closing arguments, Judge Haze reviewed her notes silently, the courtroom tense with anticipation. Finally, she looked up, her gaze steady, direct. Based on the evidence presented, this court finds that Mr. Arthur Williams improperly transferred funds, specifically designated for shared marital retirement, to purchase assets for personal use and for the benefit of a third party, without the knowledge or consent of Mrs. Beatrice Williams. Pause. The temporary freeze on all Silverleaf Holdings assets is hereby made permanent, pending final divorce proceedings. Arthur sat motionless, stunned, his face pale. Additionally, given the evidence suggesting flight risk and the sudden disappearance of Ms. Dubois, the court orders the surrender of passports for both Mr. Arthur Williams and Ms. Celeste Dubois within 24 hours. Arthur looked utterly defeated, stunned by both the ruling and the revelation of Celeste's disappearance. Mrs. Williams, Judge Haze added, looking at me, your establishment of new, protected personal funds through your inheritance is noted and commended by this court. However, this does not eliminate Mr. Williams's responsibility for his actions regarding the original funds. As we gathered our materials to leave, Arthur approached, his voice low and urgent. Beatrice, about Celeste leaving? I didn't. No, we need to talk through our attorneys, I replied, moving past him. Outside the courtroom, Arthur stood alone by the courtroom door, watching his family leave without him. The cost of his choices was finally becoming clear, he thought. I'd be powerless after surgery. He was very, very wrong. The drive home from the courthouse was quiet, each of us processing the day's seismic events in our own way. My mother, Mirabelle, sat beside me, her hand resting gently on my arm, a silent anchor. Eleanor, Arthur's sister, sat behind us, her usual composed demeanor replaced by a look of profound contemplation. The formal, clinical legal terms had laid bare Arthur's actions, transforming whispers and accusations into documented, court-affirmed facts. The reality of his betrayal was settling in, heavy and undeniable. Do you think Celeste actually left the country? Eleanor asked suddenly, breaking the silence, her voice tight with a mixture of shock and dawning realization. I don't know, I answered honestly. But the court order for passport surrender will make it difficult for Arthur to join her if she did. The thought offered a small, bitter satisfaction. He looked utterly surprised when Mr. Maxwell mentioned she'd moved out. My mother observed. Yes, I agreed. I think he truly believed she was loyal to him. It's part of his new horizons. So she abandoned him too, Eleanor said, a hint of irony in her tone. The irony was not lost on any of us. Arthur, who had so meticulously planned his own abandonment of our shared life, was now experiencing the sharp sting of betrayal himself. When we arrived home, my mother and Eleanor came in briefly. The unspoken support, the tangible presence of both maternal and paternal family members. created a much-needed buffer against the emotional aftermath of the hearing, helping me transition from the formality of the courtroom back to the safety and familiarity of my home. After they left, I found myself walking through the house, touching familiar objects that suddenly felt foreign, tainted by the deceit that had pervaded our lives. In our bedroom, Arthur's closet door still stood ajar, the gaps on the rack, where clothing had been removed, a chilling reminder of his clandestine preparations. The fear and shock that had initially dominated my response to Arthur's betrayal were now slowly being replaced by a stronger, clear-eyed determination. Arthur tried calling several times that evening. I let the calls go to voicemail, not ready for his explanations or justifications. His messages grew increasingly desperate, first angry about the court's decision, and shocked and bewildered about Celeste's departure, finally pleading to discuss arrangements and understand what went wrong. I listened to each one dispassionately, forwarding them to Leo as documentation of Arthur's escalating state of mind. What struck me most was how quickly his priority had shifted from Celeste back to me, back to the family connections he had so casually discarded once he realized she had abandoned him. It was a stark revelation of his true self-serving nature. The days following the hearing saw Arthur's world rapidly unravel. The court-appointed receiver immediately took control of the frozen assets, the luxury condo in Pinnacle Towers, a sleek yacht named New Horizons, which now sat idle, a monument to his folly. Celeste Dubois remained untraceable, having apparently fled the country before the passport surrender order took effect, leaving Arthur stranded and bewildered. He had moved into a small, temporary apartment downtown, a significant downgrade from the opulent lifestyle he had envisioned with Celeste. The swiftness of his fall was almost poetic justice. My own life, meanwhile, began to rebuild itself. Initial crisis had been addressed, my financial future secured by my grandmother's wisdom, and Arthur's deception officially documented. Now, it was about navigating the aftermath, healing, and establishing new routines. I continued my work with the Philanthropic Foundation, finding solace and purpose in its mission. The board members, many of whom had known Arthur for years, offered their quiet support, their expressions conveying a deep understanding and empathy. My assistant Maria proved invaluable, shielding me from unnecessary distractions and handling administrative tasks with quiet efficiency. One quiet Saturday morning, I found myself sorting through old photo albums in the living room. Images of family vacations, milestone celebrations, and ordinary moments captured during happier times. The smiling faces looked back at me like artifacts from another life, one built on what I now recognized as a carefully maintained illusion. "Do we have to get rid of all of these?" asked Sarah, my cousin, who had dropped by for a visit, finding me surrounded by scattered photographs. "No," I assured her. "We're just reorganizing, not erasing." She sat beside me, picking up a photo from our 40th wedding anniversary. Arthur, beaming, his arm around my waist, the picture of a devoted husband. "It's weird," she said softly. "These happy memories still happened, even though everything was different than we thought." Her observation captured the complicated reality we were navigating. The joy in those moments had been genuine, even if the foundation beneath them had been compromised by Arthur's character. "People are complex," I told her, my voice gentle. "Arthur loved the idea of us then, and he loved himself in that role. His betrayal was about his own flaws, not about that love. This perspective hadn't come easily to me. It had emerged gradually through my own therapy sessions. As I worked to separate legitimate anger at Arthur's actions from the need to move forward with a clear mind and an open heart, later that day, I met with Clara at a small cafe near the bank, no longer as client and banker, but as friends. "Divorce filing is progressing well," I told her. "Arthur's legal position has weakened considerably since Celeste disappeared with whatever liquid assets they managed to hide." Clara nodded thoughtfully. "When you first came to me about those missing funds, Beatrice, I never imagined it would unravel so completely." "Neither did I admitted.
Ow!
"I was just trying to understand what happened to our retirement accounts." "And now?" she asked, her eyes searching mine. "I'm building something new for myself," I answered, a genuine smile gracing my lips. "A future based on truth and transparency, not illusions." That evening, I sat on our back porch watching the sunset paint the sky in purples and golds. My great Aunt Eleanor's rocking chair creaked gently beneath me, a piece of furniture I'd inherited along with her financial wisdom. I could almost hear her voice. Beatrice, security isn't just about money. It's about knowing your own strength. The painful weeks since discovering Arthur's betrayal had revealed a resilience I hadn't known I possessed. I'd navigated legal complexities, faced down Arthur's attempts at manipulation, begun the process of rebuilding my life, all while establishing a new, unshakable foundation for my future. My phone buzzed with a text from Martha. Dinner tomorrow to celebrate. You've come through the storm. I smiled, typing back. Yes, not just survived it, navigated it. And that made all the difference. I wasn't simply a woman who had endured betrayal. I was someone who had charted a deliberate course through crisis, making conscious choices that protected what mattered most: my independence, my dignity, and my peace of mind. The transformation wasn't just in circumstances, but in my perception of myself, of relationships, of what constitutes real security. Arthur's betrayal had stripped away illusions, but in their place grew something more valuable, an authentic understanding of my own capacity. His attempt to render me powerless after surgery had ironically ignited a strength I hadn't fully recognized in myself until now. 1 week after the initial court hearing, the temporary asset freeze was scheduled for review, a critical juncture. In the legal battle, I knew I needed to strengthen my position further, building a case that would withstand Arthur's increasingly aggressive legal maneuvers. His attorney, Gerald Hoffman, true to form, filed a motion claiming my inheritance should be considered in the asset division. He argued that since I'd used it to establish new, protected personal funds, it had been commingled with marital obligations, therefore making it subject to equitable distribution. That's absurd, I replied to Leo during our morning call, my voice tight with indignation. He steals our retirement funds, and now wants access to the money I've used to protect myself. The sheer audacity. It's a desperate tactic, Beatrice. Leo agreed, his voice calm and reassuring. But one we need to counter definitively. We need comprehensive documentation showing the inheritance has always been maintained separately. I spent that entire morning at Mr. Davies' office. The quiet, wood-paneled room, a sanctuary of financial precision. Together, we reviewed every transaction related to my great Aunt Eleanor's trust since its establishment decades ago. We created a meticulously detailed timeline, proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that the inheritance had never been commingled with marital assets. Every investment, every dividend, every expense was clearly separated, managed independently, and never contributed to our joint accounts. Eleanor was remarkably foresighted, Mr. Davies observed as we completed the documentation, his gaze thoughtful. The trust's language specifically anticipated the possibility of divorce and provided explicit protection clauses against marital claims. She lived through difficult times, I explained, a small, wry smile touching my lips. She believed financial independence was a woman's most powerful protection, a shield against unforeseen storms. She was right, Beatrice. Mr. Davies said simply, a hint of admiration in his voice. Next, I met with Dr. Evelyn Reed, a forensic accountant Leo had highly recommended. She had been diligently reviewing Arthur's initial financial disclosures, looking for inconsistencies or hidden assets we hadn't yet discovered. Dr. Reed was a formidable woman, sharp-eyed and methodical, with an uncanny ability to spot anomalies in complex ledgers. There are significant gaps, she reported, spreading documents across the large conference table in Leo's office. Her fingers, adorned with simple silver rings, moved deftly across columns of numbers.
Oh.
Regular transfers to offshore accounts, beginning approximately 18 months ago, structured to appear as legitimate business investments, but lacking corresponding documentation for what those investments actually are. She pointed to a series of transactions, highlighting them with a yellow marker. These movements suggest preparation. He was establishing financial pipelines that could be activated quickly if needed. For what purpose? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. My professional assessment is that these represent contingency planning for asset concealment, Dr. Reed stated plainly, Small enough amounts to avoid immediate notice, consistent enough to establish patterns that could handle larger transfers when needed. Can we trace where the money went? I pressed, a flicker of hope stirring within me. Dr. Reed's expression was grim. Some of it, yes, to shell corporations in jurisdictions with weak disclosure laws, but several transfers went to truly opaque jurisdictions with strong privacy laws. We may never know the full extent of the hidden funds. How much are we talking about? I asked, bracing myself. Conservatively, at least $480,000 over the past 18 months. It's potentially more, depending on what we uncover in the full discovery process. The amount staggered me. Not just our retirement funds, and not just the assets used for Celeste, but an additional $500,000 I hadn't even realized was missing. Arthur's betrayal was more extensive, more deeply rooted than I had ever imagined. It wasn't a spontaneous act of passion. It was a long-term, calculated scheme. Document everything you can find, Dr. Reed, Leo instructed, his voice firm. We need to demonstrate a pattern of systematic financial deception to the court, not just isolated incidents. That afternoon, I received an unexpected visitor at my philanthropic foundation's office, Clara, from the bank. She arrived carrying a slim folder and a concerned expression. "This isn't strictly protocol, Beatrice," she said after closing my office door, her voice lowered. "But I felt you should know." My stomach tightened. "What is it, Clara?" "Arthur tried to access your new accounts yesterday."
How?
Heart jolted. "How? He doesn't have authorization." He claimed there had been a clerical error in the account setup, and that he should have been listed as a joint holder. She explained, opening the folder and showing me the access attempt documentation. The timestamp on the report was chillingly precise. Just hours after. Arthur's attorneys had received our initial discovery documents, which included information about my separate financial arrangements and my new bank accounts. "Failed," Clara continued, her lips thinning. He became quite insistent, demanding to speak with management, even threatening to escalate the matter. "Thank you for telling me, Clara," I said sincerely. My voice filled with genuine gratitude, and for maintaining the account security. Clara nodded. "The bank takes unauthorized access attempts very seriously. We've flagged all your accounts with additional verification requirements." She hesitated, her gaze thoughtful. "Beatrice, I've worked with many divorce situations over the years. This level of aggression regarding accounts, he has no legitimate claim to its concerning." Her warning echoed fears I'd been trying to suppress. Arthur's financial maneuvers were becoming increasingly desperate, almost frantic, as he realized how much control he'd lost. After Clara left, immediately called Martha to update her on this latest development. Her response was immediate and practical. "Change all your passwords, Beatrice. Email, social media, cloud storage, everything. Use complex combinations he wouldn't guess. Enable two-factor authentication wherever possible." "You'd think he'd try to access my personal accounts?" I asked, incredulous. "I think a man who systematically drains his joint retirement accounts, attempts to access his wife's protected inheritance, and then tries to manipulate bank staff into giving him access to newly opened private accounts will try anything." She replied bluntly, "Better to overprotect than underestimate, Beatrice. He's cornered, and that's when people become most dangerous." I followed her advice that evening, methodically updating every digital access point in my life. It was a tedious but necessary task, reinforcing my digital security as I had, my financial and legal ones. The next morning, I received an email from Leo with the subject line, "Position strengthened." It obtained sworn statements from 3 former clients of Celeste Dubois, all describing similar patterns, assistance in concealing marital assets before divorce filings, specialized guidance in creating transaction trails difficult for spouses to trace. While not directly admissible in our specific case, these statements established a compelling pattern that supported our central argument that Arthur's actions represented deliberate, systematic financial deception rather than legitimate, strategic reallocation. Our position was strengthening daily. Each document, each witness, each financial trace added another layer of protection against Arthur's increasingly desperate attempts to regain control of assets he'd hidden and access resources he hadn't known existed. As I prepared for bed, I realized something important had shifted within me. The fear and shock that had initially dominated my response to Arthur's betrayal had been replaced by something stronger. A clear determination to protect what mattered most, my future, my independence, and the peace of mind my great aunt had so wisely secured for me. 2 days before our scheduled court hearing for the permanent asset freeze, Leo called with unexpected news. Judge Haze has been reassigned to a high-profile criminal case, he reported. Our hearing has been transferred to Judge Raymond Ellis. My heart sank. Is that good or bad for us? Potentially challenging, Leo admitted. Ellis is known for favoring financial expertise and complex investment arguments. Arthur's attorney will position him as the sophisticated investor making decisions beyond your comprehension. So we need to counter that narrative convincingly, I concluded, exactly and quickly. After hanging up, I immediately called Clara at the bank, explaining our situation and asking for her professional assessment of my financial competence. I'd be happy to provide a statement, Beatrice, she agreed without hesitation. You've managed complex project finances through your foundation work for years. It's clearly documented in your banking history. Next, I reached out to Professor Alistair Finch at the local university's business school, who had consulted on several of my foundation's larger commercial endowment projects. He readily agreed to review my financial management records for the foundation and provide an expert opinion on my demonstrated financial literacy and acumen. By late afternoon, I had secured these critical professional endorsements, but Leo remained concerned about the overall narrative. We need someone who can directly counter Arthur's self-presentation as the financial authority in your relationship, he explained. Someone who observed the dynamics firsthand. Someone whose professional standing is beyond reproach. I thought about it carefully. Arthur's former senior partner, now retired, Julian Thorne. He had known us both for over 2 decades. He witnessed how I managed the foundation's growing portfolio while Arthur worked under him, often scoffing. At the simplicity of philanthropic finance, Leo nodded. Perfect. Senior financial professional who observed your respective capabilities directly can be invaluable to Judge Ellis, who values such insights. Can you reach him? I hadn't spoken to Julian since his retirement party 5 years ago, but I still had his contact information. I called immediately, explaining the situation as concisely and calmly as possible. Beatrice. Julian responded after listening patiently, his voice grave. I've been hearing rumors about Arthur's professional challenges. I had no idea things had escalated to this point. Professional challenges? I repeated, confused. Arthur had always presented himself as having left his firm for greener pastures, a more prestigious position. There was a pause before Julian continued cautiously. Arthur's departure from our firm wasn't entirely his choice. There were concerns about his judgment with client funds, particularly regarding speculative investments. Nothing we could prove definitively, but enough to encourage a transition. We didn't want to cause a scandal, but he was certainly under internal scrutiny. This was entirely new, damning information. Arthur had described his move to a new firm as a strategic career advancement, a step up. He had lied about this too. Julian, would you be willing to discuss this with my attorney and possibly provide a statement about your observations of our respective financial competence? Absolutely, Beatrice. He agreed without hesitation. Arthur's behavior, with your retirement funds, is unconscionable. I'm happy to help set the record straight about who actually demonstrated financial responsibility and acumen in your marriage. That evening, Julian met with Leo at his office while I joined by phone. He painted a picture of Arthur that contrasted sharply with the image Arthur had cultivated, describing a man who took excessive risks with client funds, who prioritized impressive short-term gains over long-term security, and who frequently dismissed concerns raised by female colleagues as emotional responses or lacking vision. Beatrice's foundation, Julian noted, his voice firm, meanwhile showed consistent, stable growth and meticulous management. She routinely consulted appropriate experts for complex decisions while maintaining hands-on oversight of day-to-day operations Exactly the approach we recommend to clients for long-term wealth management. By the end of the meeting, Leo was visibly pleased. This completely reverses the narrative Arthur is trying to establish, he stated. Julian's professional standing makes his assessment particularly credible to Judge Ellis. My confidence solidified. The ground beneath Arthur's feet was truly crumbling. 1 week after the initial court hearing, the temporary asset freeze was scheduled for review, a critical juncture in the legal battle. I knew I needed to strengthen my position further, building a case that would withstand Arthur's increasingly aggressive legal maneuvers. His attorney, Gerald Hoffman, true to form, filed a motion claiming my inheritance should be considered in the asset division. He argued that, since I'd used it to establish new, protected personal funds, it had been commingled with marital obligations, therefore making it subject to equitable distribution. That's absurd, I replied to Leo during our morning call, my voice tight with indignation. Steals our retirement funds and now wants access to the money I've used to protect myself. The sheer audacity. It's a desperate tactic, Beatrice, Leo agreed, his voice calm and reassuring. But one we need to counter definitively. We need comprehensive documentation showing the inheritance has always been maintained separately. Spent that entire morning at Mr. Davies's office, the quiet, wood-paneled room, a sanctuary of financial precision. Together, we reviewed every transaction related to my great and Eleanor's trust since its establishment decades ago. We created a meticulously detailed timeline, proving beyond a shadow of a doubt that the inheritance had never been commingled with marital assets. Every investment, every dividend, every expense was clearly separated, managed independently, and never contributed to our joint accounts. Eleanor was remarkably foresighted. Mr. Davies observed as we completed the documentation, his gaze thoughtful. The trust's language specifically anticipated the possibility of divorce and provided explicit protection clauses against marital claims. She lived through difficult times, I explained, a small, wry smile touching my lips. She believed financial independence was a woman's most powerful protection, a shield against unforeseen storms. She was right, Beatrice, Mr. Davies said simply, a hint of admiration in his voice. Next, I met with Dr. Evelyn Reed, a forensic accountant Leo had highly recommended. She had been diligently reviewing Arthur's initial financial disclosures, looking for inconsistencies or hidden assets we hadn't yet discovered. Dr. Reed was a formidable woman, fair and methodical, with an uncanny ability to spot anomalies in complex ledgers. There are significant gaps, she reported, spreading documents across the large conference table in Leo's office. Her fingers, adorned with simple silver rings, moved deftly across columns of numbers, regular transfers to offshore accounts. Beginning approximately 18 months ago, structured to appear as legitimate business investments, but lacking corresponding documentation for what those investments actually are. She pointed to a series of transactions, highlighting them with a yellow marker. These movements suggest preparation. He was establishing financial pipelines that could be activated quickly if needed. For what purpose? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. My professional assessment is that these represent contingency planning for asset concealment, Dr. Reed stated plainly. It's small enough amounts to avoid immediate notice, consistent enough to establish patterns that could handle larger transfers when needed. Can we trace where the money went? I pressed, a flicker of hope stirring within me. Dr. Reed's expression was grim. Some of it, yes. 2 shell corporations in jurisdictions with weak disclosure laws. But several transfers went to truly opaque jurisdictions with strong privacy laws. We may never know the full extent of the hidden funds. How much are we talking about? I asked, bracing myself. Conservatively, at least $480,000 over the past 18 months, potentially more, depending on what we uncover in the full discovery process. The amount staggered me. It's not just our retirement funds, and not just the assets used for Celeste, but an additional $500,000 I hadn't even realized was missing. Arthur's betrayal was more extensive, more deeply rooted than I had ever imagined. It wasn't a spontaneous act of passion. Ouch! It was a long-term, calculated scheme. Document everything you can find, Dr. Reed, Leo instructed, his voice firm. We need to demonstrate a pattern of systematic financial deception to the court, not just isolated incidents. That afternoon, I received an unexpected visitor at my philanthropic foundation's office, Clara from the bank. She arrived carrying a slim folder and a concerned expression. "This isn't strictly protocol, Beatrice," she said, after closing my office door, her voice lowered. "But I felt you should know." My stomach tightened. "What is it, Clara?" "Arthur tried to access your new accounts yesterday, and my heart jolted. He doesn't have authorization. He claimed there had been a clerical error in the account setup, and that he should have been listed as a joint holder," she explained, opening the folder and showing me the access attempt documentation. The timestamp on the report was chillingly precise. Just hours after Arthur's attorneys had received our initial discovery documents, which included information about my separate financial arrangements and my new bank accounts. When that failed, Clara continued, her lips thinning. He became quite insistent, demanding to speak with management, even threatening to escalate the matter. "Thank you for telling me, Clara," I said sincerely, my voice filled with genuine gratitude, and for maintaining the account security. Clara nodded. "The bank takes unauthorized access attempts very seriously. We flagged all your accounts with additional verification requirements." She hesitated, her gaze thoughtful. "Beatrice, I've worked with many divorce situations over the years. This level of aggression regarding accounts he has no legitimate claim to, it's concerning." Her warning echoed fears I'd been trying to suppress. Arthur's financial maneuvers were becoming increasingly desperate, almost frantic, as he realized how much control he'd lost. After Clara left, I immediately called Martha to update her on this latest development. Her response was immediate and practical. "Change all your passwords, Beatrice. Email, social media, cloud storage, everything. Use complex combinations he wouldn't guess. Enable two-factor authentication wherever possible." "You think he'd try to access my personal accounts?" I asked, incredulous. "I think a man who systematically drains his joint retirement accounts, attempts to access his wife's protected inheritance, and then tries to manipulate bank staff into giving him access to newly opened private accounts will try anything," she replied bluntly. "Better to overprotect than underestimate, Beatrice. He's cornered, and that's when people become most dangerous." I followed her advice that evening, methodically updating every digital access point in my life. It was a tedious but necessary task, reinforcing my digital security as I had my financial and legal ones. The next morning, I received an email from Leo with the subject line, "Position strengthened." He had obtained sworn statements from 3 former clients of Celeste Dubois, all describing similar patterns: assistance in concealing marital assets before divorce filings, specialized guidance in creating transaction trails difficult for spouses to trace. While not directly admissible in our specific case, these statements established a compelling pattern that supported our central argument that Arthur's actions represented deliberate, systematic financial deception rather than legitimate, strategic reallocation. Our position was strengthening daily. Each document, each witness, each financial trace added another layer of protection against Arthur's increasingly desperate attempts to regain control of assets he'd hidden and access resources he hadn't known existed. As I prepared for bed, I realized something important had shifted within me. The fear and shock that had initially dominated my response to Arthur's betrayal had been replaced by something stronger, a clear determination to protect what mattered most: my future, my independence, and the peace of mind my great-aunt had so wisely secured for me. 2 days before our scheduled court hearing for the permanent asset freeze, Leo called with unexpected news. "Judge Haze has been reassigned to a high-profile criminal case," he reported. "Our hearing has been transferred to Judge Raymond Ellis." My heart sank. Is that good or bad for us? "Potentially challenging," Leo admitted. Ellis is known for favoring financial expertise and complex investment arguments. Arthur's attorney will position him as the sophisticated investor making decisions beyond your comprehension. So we need to counter that narrative convincingly, I concluded. Exactly and quickly. After hanging up, I immediately called Clara at the bank, explaining our situation and asking for her professional assessment of my financial competence. "I'd be happy to provide a statement, Beatrice," she agreed without hesitation. "You've managed complex project finances through your foundation work for years. It's clearly documented in your banking history." Next, out to Professor Alastair Finch at the local university's business school, who had consulted on several of my foundation's larger commercial endowment projects. He readily agreed to review my financial management records for the foundation and provide an expert opinion on my demonstrated financial literacy and acumen. By late afternoon, I had secured these critical professional endorsements, but Leo remained. "Concerned about the overall narrative? I need someone who can directly counter Arthur's self-presentation as the financial authority in your relationship," he explained. "Someone who observed the dynamics firsthand, someone who's professional. Standing is beyond reproach." I thought about it carefully. Arthur's former senior partner, now retired Julian Thorne. He had known us both for over 2 decades. He witnessed how I managed the foundation's growing portfolio while Arthur worked under him, often scoffing at the simplicity of philanthropic finance. Leo nodded. "A senior financial professional who observed your respective capabilities directly can be invaluable to Judge Ellis, who values such insights. Can you reach him?" "Spoken to Julian since his retirement party 5 years ago, but I still had his contact information." I called immediately, explaining the situation as concisely and calmly as possible. "Beatrice." Julian responded after listening patiently, his voice grave. "I've been hearing rumors about Arthur's professional challenges. I had no idea things had escalated to this point." "Professional challenges," repeated, confused. Arthur had always presented himself as having left his firm for greener pastures, a more prestigious position. There was a pause before Julian continued cautiously. "Arthur's departure from our firm wasn't entirely his choice. There were concerns about his judgment with client funds, particularly regarding speculative investments. Nothing we could prove definitively, but enough to encourage a transition. We didn't want to cause a scandal, but he was certainly under internal scrutiny. This was entirely new, damning information. Arthur had described his move to a new firm as a strategic career advancement, a step up. He had lied about this too. "Julian, would you be willing to discuss this with my attorney and possibly provide a statement about your observations of our respective financial competence?" "Absolutely, Beatrice," he agreed without hesitation. "Arthur's behavior with your retirement funds is unconscionable. I'm happy to help set the record straight about who actually demonstrated financial responsibility and acumen in your marriage." That evening, Julian met with Leo at his office while I joined by phone. He painted a picture of Arthur that contrasted sharply with the image Arthur had cultivated, describing a man who took excessive risks with client funds, who prioritized impressive short-term gains over long-term security, and who frequently dismissed concerns raised by female colleagues as emotional responses or lacking vision. Beatrice's foundation, Julian noted, his voice firm, meanwhile, showed consistent, stable growth and meticulous management. She routinely consulted appropriate experts for complex decisions while maintaining hands-on oversight of day-to-day operations. Exactly the approach we recommend to clients for long-term wealth management. By the end of the meeting, Leo was visibly pleased. "This completely reverses the narrative Arthur is trying to establish," he stated. "Julian's professional standing makes his assessment particularly credible to Judge Ellis." My confidence solidified. The ground beneath Arthur's feet was truly crumbling.